Hello, my friend. Welcome to my channel.
The champagne fountain sparkled under crystal chandeliers, but all I could see was the look on Patricia Ashford's face when she whispered to her son, my fiancé Marcus, that I looked like the help who had wandered in through the wrong entrance. My name is Elena Castellano. I'm 28 years old, and at that moment, standing in my deliberately modest navy dress and drugstore jewelry, I probably did look out of place among the designer gowns and inherited diamonds filling the Ashford family's estate. What Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 14 months testing them. Testing Marcus. Testing his family's character when they thought I had nothing to offer but love. They failed spectacularly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. Back to a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, when I met Marcus Ashford and made a decision that would change everything. 14 months ago, I was sitting in a corner cafe, laptop open, reviewing quarterly reports for Castellano Industries, the manufacturing empire my grandfather built from nothing and my father expanded into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. I was wearing jeans and an old Stanford sweatshirt, my hair in a messy bun, looking exactly like what I was, a tired MBA graduate who'd been up until 3 a.m., analyzing market projections. Marcus sat down at the table next to mine, tall, handsome in that polished way that comes from good genetics and better tailors. He smiled at me, asked if I was a student, and we started talking. When he asked what I did, I told him I worked in manufacturing. He nodded, then asked if I was in quality control or assembly line management. I said something vague about operations support. He filled in the blanks himself, assuming I was a factory floor supervisor or maybe an administrative assistant. I didn't correct him. You might think that was cruel or manipulative, but let me tell you what happened 2 weeks before I met Marcus. I had been on a date with another man, someone from my usual social circle. The moment he found out who my family was, everything changed. He became performative, calculating. Every word, every gesture was suddenly about positioning himself for access to wealth and connections. That's when I remembered something my grandmother told me before she passed. She said the truest measure of a person's character is how they treat someone who can do absolutely nothing for them. When someone believes you have nothing to offer, no money, no status, no connections, that's when you see who they really are. So when Marcus made his assumptions about my career, I saw an opportunity, an experiment, if you will. What kind of man was he when he thought I was ordinary? How would his family treat someone they considered beneath them? I was about to find out. The first few months with Marcus were lovely. He was attentive, charming, genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. We went to casual restaurants, walked through parks, spent weekends at the beach. He paid for most things, but never made me feel less than for it. When I offered to split bills, he'd smile and say he was happy to treat me. I lived in a modest apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, one of several properties I owned, but he didn't need to know that. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic that I'd bought in college and kept for sentimental reasons. My clothes came from normal stores, nothing flashy. I was playing a part, yes, but here's the thing. It wasn't entirely false. This was also me. The real me, stripped of the trappings of wealth. I liked simple dinners and movie nights. I liked not worrying about photographers or social obligations. With Marcus, I was just Elena, until I met his family. The invitation came 6 months into our relationship, dinner at the Ashford estate. Marcus mentioned, almost casually, that his mother was particular about first impressions, and that I might want to dress nicely. There was something in his tone, not quite warning, not quite apology, that made my instincts prickle. I did my research. The Ashfords were old money, or at least they presented themselves that way. Patricia Ashford's social media was a carefully curated collection of charity galas, country club events, and vacation photos from exotic locations. Marcus's father, Richard, ran what appeared to be a successful investment firm. They lived in a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. But something felt off. The more I dug, the more inconsistencies I found. Properties with multiple liens, business partnerships that had dissolved messily, a pattern of lawsuits, settled quietly but expensively. I hired a private investigator discreetly, through one of my father's trusted attorneys. What came back was illuminating. The Ashfords were drowning in debt. The mansion had 3 mortgages. Richard's investment firm was barely solvent. They were living on credit and reputation. One bad quarter away from total collapse, and they were looking for a lifeline. I arrived at the Ashford estate on a Friday evening in May. Driving my old Honda up a driveway lined with manicured hedges and pretentious marble statuary. My dress was simple but elegant navy blue. Knee-length. Nothing that would draw attention. My jewelry was minimal. Small gold studs. No necklace. No rings except a simple band that had been my grandmother's. I looked exactly like someone who was trying her best but clearly didn't belong. Marcus met me at the door with a kiss that felt slightly rehearsed, like he was performing for an audience I couldn't yet see. His eyes flickered over my outfit, and I caught something in his expression, not quite disappointment, but something adjacent to it. Concern maybe. Or embarrassment. Inside, the house was a monument to new money desperately trying to look like old money. Crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings in gilt frames. I recognized them as expensive prints, not originals. Furniture chosen for appearance rather than comfort. Everything screamed, look how wealthy we are, in a way that actual wealth never needs to. Patricia Ashford stood in the foyer like a queen surveying her domain. She was 62, according to my research. But her face had the tight, artificial smoothness of someone who'd seen several excellent plastic surgeons. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect helmet that probably required industrial strength product. Her dress was designer, her jewelry real, and her smile absolutely, completely fake. She extended her hand to me like she was granting an audience. The handshake was limp, dismissive. Then she leaned toward Marcus and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "She looks like the help. Are you sure she used the right entrance?" I smiled and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. If I had known what I was walking into that night, I might have worn armor. But then again, information is the best armor. And I'd done my homework. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have hosted a royal banquet. The table was absurdly long, set with enough silverware to perform surgery. I counted 6 forks at each place setting. 6. Marcus's father, Richard, was a large man who'd clearly surrendered to the comforts of wealth after an athletic youth. His handshake was meant to be impressive but just felt tired. His eyes, though, were calculating. He watched me throughout the evening with the expression of a man running numbers in his head. Then there was Vivienne, Marcus's older sister. She arrived 20 minutes late, apparently her signature move, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent and enough diamonds to fund a small nation. Her greeting to me was a single word: hello. Not nice to meet you. Not, Marcus has told us about you. Just hello. Delivered with the warmth of a frozen fish. The 4th family member was Chase, Marcus's younger brother. 26, trust fund confidence, and a smile that had probably worked on countless Instagram models. He looked at me like I was a curiosity. Something amusing to observe. Throughout the meal, Patricia led what I thought of as the interrogation. Where had I grown up? A small town in Central California. What did my parents do? My father worked in manufacturing. What was my current job? I worked in operations. Each answer seemed to confirm everything Patricia had already decided about me. I was common. I was beneath them. I was absolutely, certainly not good enough for her son. Vivienne asked about my education. I mentioned Stanford. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Perhaps I wasn't quite as common as they'd thought, but then she asked what I'd studied. Business administration. She smirked. How practical, she said, in a tone that made practical sound like an insult. The questions continued through each course. Where did I live? A small apartment. What did I drive? An older Honda. Did I have savings? Enough to get by. Each answer was catalogued, assessed, and found wanting. What they didn't know was that I was conducting my own assessment. And they were failing miserably. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to find the bathroom. The Ashford estate was a maze of hallways lined with expensive art and family photographs. As I walked, I noticed something interesting. In several photos, there was another woman standing next to Marcus. Beautiful, dark-haired, always perfectly dressed. In one photo, she was kissing his cheek. In another, they were dancing. I filed that observation away. As I approached the bathroom, I heard voices coming from a partially open door. Patricia's voice, sharp with urgency, and Vivienne's responding. I stopped. Every instinct told me to keep walking, but something in Patricia's tone made me pause. We need this to work, Patricia was saying. The Castellano connection could save us. My heart stopped. Castellano. My family name. But does Marcus even know? Vivienne asked. Of course not, Patricia snapped. And he doesn't need to. Once they're married, we'll have access to her family's resources, manufacturing connections, business opportunities. Even if she's just a factory supervisor, her family owns the company. That's the connection that matters. I felt cold. They actually thought my family owned a small manufacturing business. They'd done research, found the company name, and assumed I was some low-level employee trying to hide my connection to the owners. They had no idea the Castellano Industries they'd found was my family's empire. No idea that I wasn't connected to wealth, I was the wealth. What about Alexandra? Vivian asked. There was a pause. Alexandra is still interested. If this doesn't work out, we have a backup plan. Her family's investment firm would be just as useful. Alexandra, the dark-haired woman in the photos. I moved silently away from the door, my mind racing. This wasn't just a family who looked down on me. This was a calculated plan. Marcus was being positioned like a chess piece, moved toward whatever connection could save his family's crumbling empire. The question was, did Marcus know? 2 months after that first dinner, Marcus proposed. We were at a restaurant, nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place we both liked. He got down on one knee with a ring that looked impressive in dim lighting but would reveal its flaws in daylight. The diamond was cloudy, the setting uneven. It was the kind of ring that looked expensive but wasn't. Much like everything else about the Ashfords, I said yes. Not because I loved him. I'd realized weeks ago that what I felt was curiosity, not love. Not because I wanted to marry into his family. They'd shown me exactly who they were, and I believed them. I said yes because I wanted to see how far they would go. I wanted to watch their plan unfold. I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. The engagement party was scheduled for 8 weeks later. Patricia insisted on hosting it at the estate. She wanted to make a statement, she said, to introduce me properly to their social circle. I agreed to everything. Every suggestion. Every plan. I played the grateful fiancé, overwhelmed by their generosity, deeply appreciative of being welcomed into such a prestigious family. Meanwhile, I was conducting my own investigation. My private investigator had expanded his research. The Ashfords weren't just in debt, they were being investigated for fraud. Richard's investment firm had been using new investor money to pay returns to old investors. A classic Ponzi scheme. Starting to unravel. They had maybe 6 months before everything collapsed. The wedding date they were pushing for was in 5 months. They weren't trying to save themselves anymore. They were trying to escape. Find a wealthy connection. Milk it for whatever they could. Then disappear before the house of cards collapsed. And I was supposed to be their escape route. 3 weeks before the engagement party, I had lunch with Marcus. We sat at a cafe, one of our places. He called it, and I watched him carefully as we talked. He seemed genuinely happy about the engagement. He talked about our future, about finding a house together, about eventually starting a family. Either he was an extraordinary actor, or he truly didn't know what his family was planning. I decided to test him. Your mother mentioned Alexandra the other day, I said casually. Who is she? Something flickered across Marcus's face. Guilt? Nervousness? It was gone before I could identify it. Old girlfriend, he said. We dated for a few years. Didn't work out. Your mom seemed to think highly of her. My mom thinks highly of anyone with money, Marcus said. And there was unexpected bitterness in his voice. Alexandra's family runs an investment firm. My mother thought that made her perfect. But you didn't. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. I want someone real, Elena. Someone who cares about me, not my family's name or connections. That's you. He seemed sincere. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd been as manipulated by his family as they were trying to manipulate me. That night, I did more research on Alexandra Hartley. Her family's investment firm was indeed successful and legitimate. Unlike Richard's crumbling scheme, she came from actual old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. And according to social media, she was still single, still attending events where the Ashfords were present, still, in several recent photos, standing just a little too close to Marcus. I hired a second investigator to follow Marcus for a week. I needed to know if he was actively betraying me or just passively allowing his family to manipulate him. The answer came back 3 days later. Both. Marcus had met Alexandra for coffee twice that week. They'd been photographed holding hands across the table. At one point, she'd touched his face. He'd smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. I printed the photographs, added them to my growing file, and started planning my engagement party outfit. The night of the engagement party arrived with spring rain and my carefully laid plans. I dressed in my modest apartment, the one Marcus had been to dozens of times, never knowing I owned the entire building. I put on the same navy dress I'd worn to that first dinner, the one Patricia had smirked at. I wore my grandmother's simple gold studs. I drove my old Honda. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong at an Ashford event. Perfect. Marcus had offered to have a car pick me up. I declined. Said I wanted to drive myself. Needed the time to prepare mentally. He'd accepted that without question. The Ashford estate was transformed for the party. White tents on the lawn, crystal chandeliers hanging from temporary structures, a string quartet playing near the fountain. It was beautiful in that expensive, impersonal way that money can buy but taste can't guarantee. I parked in the guest lot and walked toward the main entrance. That's when I saw him, a security guard I didn't recognize, standing at the door like a sentinel. He looked at me the way people look at things they want to remove. His eyes traveled from my dress to my shoes to my car, visible in the parking lot behind me. Service entrance is around back, he said. Not quite rudely but not kindly either. I smiled. I'm actually a guest. Elena Castellano. He checked his list, frowned, then waved me through with obvious reluctance. The look on his face said he thought there had been some mistake. Inside, the party was in full swing. 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, all drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly groceries. The air was thick with expensive perfume and expensive conversation. Patricia spotted me immediately. Her face went through a remarkable journey. Confusion, recognition, then something that might have been fear, quickly masked. She approached with her frozen smile firmly in place. Elena, darling. How wonderful you could make it. Thank you for hosting, I said, matching her artificial warmth. She looked at my dress, my simple jewelry, my lack of designer accessories. Something in her expression shifted. Calculation, maybe, or confirmation of something she'd already suspected. Marcus is near the bar, she said. I'm sure he's eager to see you. As I walked through the crowd, I felt eyes following me. Guests glancing, whispering, wondering who the underdressed young woman was and why she was at this exclusive event. Let them wonder. Marcus found me before I found him. He appeared at my elbow, looking nervous in his expensive tuxedo. You made it, he said, kissing my cheek. I was starting to worry. Traffic, I lied. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he also didn't push. Instead, he took my hand and led me toward his family. The Ashfords were holding court near the center of the tent. Patricia and Richard, Vivian with her husband James, a man who always looked vaguely uncomfortable, like he'd realized too late what family he'd married into, and Chase with his latest girlfriend. They all turned as we approached. I saw the same expression cross each face. Surprise at my outfit, quickly hidden behind polite smiles. Everyone, Marcus said. I'd like to properly introduce my fiancée, Elena Castellano. Hands were shaken. Cheeks were air-kissed. Welcomes were extended, each one as genuine as Patricia's smile. And then Vivian said something that made my blood run cold. Castellano, she mused. That's the manufacturing company, isn't it? We were just reading about them in the business section. Apparently, they just secured a massive government contract. $500 million over 5 years. Every eye turned to me. I wouldn't know, I said mildly. I just work there. They don't tell us floor workers about the big contracts. But I saw it. The light in Patricia's eyes. The barely concealed excitement. They thought they'd hit the jackpot. Their son wasn't just marrying some factory worker, he was marrying into a company with a $500 million government contract. They had no idea that Castellano Industries wasn't my employer. It was my inheritance. The next hour was fascinating to watch. Patricia worked the room like a professional, making sure everyone knew that her son was marrying into the Castellano family. She didn't say it directly, that would be too crude, but she made sure to mention it in passing. To drop the company name in conversation. To ensure that everyone understood this connection. Richard cornered me near the champagne fountain, asking casual questions about my company's operations. Did we have manufacturing facilities overseas? What was our relationship with military contractors? Were we looking to diversify into new markets? I answered vaguely, playing the role of someone who was just a small cog in a big machine. Someone who didn't really understand the business side of things. Each vague answer seemed to frustrate him while simultaneously confirming what he wanted to believe. That I was simple, uninformed, but connected to something valuable. Vivian took a different approach. She pulled me aside, ostensibly to show me the garden, but really to give me what she probably thought was helpful advice. Marcus's previous girlfriend Alexandra. She came from money, Vivian said as we walked among carefully maintained rose bushes. She understood the expectations, the social obligations. I'm sure it's all very new to you. It is, I agreed. Don't worry, she said, patting my arm in a way that was supposed to be comforting but felt condescending. We'll help you adjust. We'll teach you how to dress for these events, how to behave in society. You won't always feel so out of place. I smiled and thanked her for her kindness. Inside, I was adding every word to my mental file. Chase approached me later in the evening, champagne in hand, that trust fund smile on his face. So, Elena, what's it like dating my brother? I imagine it's quite the upgrade from wherever you came from. It's lovely, I said simply. Must be nice. He continued, not having to worry about money anymore. Marcus is generous that way. I sipped my champagne and didn't respond. Let him think what he wanted. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Marcus took my hand and led me to a small raised platform at one end of the tent. The quartet stopped playing. The guests turned to face us. Patricia handed Marcus a microphone. He cleared his throat, nervous but smiling. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began. I wanted to gather everyone here to celebrate something important. Elena has made me happier than I thought possible. She's kind, she's genuine. She's real in a way that's rare in my world. I felt something twist in my chest. He sounded sincere. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd been caught in his family's web as much as I had deliberately walked into it. Elena, he continued, turning to me. I know we've only been together for 14 months. But I've never been more certain of anything. I love you. Will you marry me? He pulled out the ring box, got down on one knee in front of 200 witnesses. Every eye in the tent was on me. This was the moment. This was my decision point. I could say no. I could end this right now. Walk away. Let them wonder. Let Marcus deal with the embarrassment. Or I could say yes. I could give them exactly what they wanted. I could let them believe they'd won. And then I could show them exactly what they'd actually caught. I looked at Marcus, at his hopeful face. I looked at Patricia, at her barely concealed triumph. I looked at the crowd, at 200 people waiting to witness this moment. I smiled. Yes, I said. The tent erupted in applause. Marcus slipped the ring on my finger. People surged forward to congratulate us, and I began counting down to the moment when I would take it all away. The week after the engagement party, I met with my private investigator in a coffee shop across town. His name was David Chen, and he'd been working for my family's legal team for 15 years. Discreet, thorough, and expensive. He slid a folder across the table to me. The Ashfords are worse than we thought, he said. Richard's Ponzi scheme is about to collapse. He has federal investigators circling. They're looking at fraud charges, possibly securities violations. Timeline? I asked. 3 months, maybe 4 before someone files a complaint that triggers everything. Richard knows it's coming. He's been moving assets, hiding money, preparing for the fallout. And Patricia, she's in on it. Has been from the start. She's the one who's been recruiting new investors through her charity circles. She finds wealthy widows, befriends them, gets them to invest with Richard. I felt sick. How many victims? At least 30 that we've confirmed. Maybe more. Total losses approaching $8 million. $8 million stolen from people who trusted them. People who thought they were making safe investments for their retirement. What about Marcus? I asked quietly. David's expression softened slightly. He appears to be in the dark. We've found no evidence he knows about the Ponzi scheme. He works at a separate company, has his own income, keeps his finances separate from his parents. But he's been seeing Alexandra Hartley. We have documentation of at least 8 meetings over the past 6 weeks. Coffee, lunch, one dinner. At that dinner, they were holding hands. She kissed him when they parted. David pulled out photographs. Clear, undeniable proof that Marcus was maintaining 2 relationships simultaneously. Does she know about you? I asked. Unclear. She and Marcus are very careful in public. But based on their body language and what our lip reader could discern from video footage, they're discussing a future together. She's mentioned waiting, being patient, trusting that things will work out. So Marcus was playing both sides, keeping me as his official fiancé while maintaining his relationship with Alexandra. Probably thought he could have both, until he figured out which one was more valuable. Or maybe his family was pushing him to keep Alexandra warm while he secured me first. I need more, I said. I need documentation of everything. The fraud, the affairs, all of it. If I'm going to do this, it has to be airtight. David nodded. I've already started. The wedding is in how long? 3 months. We'll be ready. 2 weeks before the wedding, Patricia called me for lunch. Just the two of us, she said, for some bonding time. We met at a restaurant so expensive it didn't have prices on the menu. Patricia ordered for both of us, apparently. I couldn't be trusted to choose my own lunch. I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. She began once our food arrived. There are certain expectations when you marry into a family like ours. Of course, I said. You'll need to dress appropriately. Vivian has offered to take you shopping. That's very kind. And there will be social obligations. Charity events, fundraisers. You'll be expected to contribute, both your time and financially. There it was. The first direct request for money. I'm not sure how much I can contribute financially, I said carefully. My job doesn't pay that well. Patricia's smile tightened. But surely your family can help. The Castellano company has been quite successful, I understand. I'm not really close with the ownership side of the family, I lied. They're very distant relatives. I got my job through a general application, not family connections. I watched her face carefully. Was that disappointment, panic? Surely they'd want to help with wedding expenses, she pressed. A company gift, perhaps. I can ask, I said, but I wouldn't count on it. The rest of the lunch was strained. Patricia kept trying to circle back to my family connections, to the company, to what resources might be available. Each time, I gently deflected. By the time we parted, she looked worried. Good. 1 week before the wedding, Marcus went to his bachelor party. Chase had organized it a weekend in Vegas. 20 of Marcus's closest friends. I wasn't invited, obviously. But David Chen was. He'd inserted one of his operatives into Marcus's friend group months ago. A guy named Kyle who claimed to work in finance and who fit seamlessly into their circle of privilege. The video footage Kyle captured that weekend was illuminating. The first night, over expensive whiskey, Chase had proposed a toast. To my brother Marcus, who's finally doing what our parents need him to do. Marcus had laughed uncomfortably. It's not like that. Man. Come on. Another friend chimed in. We all know you're marrying the factory girl for the connections. It's smart. Get the ring on her finger, get access to her family's business. Then what? Marcus had asked, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Then you keep Alexandra on the side, Chase said, shrugging. Or you trade up once you've secured the Castellano connection. Be honest, bro. You're not in love with Elena. She's nice enough. But she's not really your type. This is business. There was a long pause on the video. Marcus took a drink. Then another. Maybe, he finally said. Maybe it started that way. But I do care about her. Caring and loving aren't the same thing, Chase said. You love Alexandra. Mom's already talked to her family about merging the investment firms once this is all settled. You just need to hold it together for a few more months. Marcus didn't respond. The video went on for another 20 minutes. More drinking, more crude jokes, more discussions about how to manage multiple relationships. Marcus participated, laughed, said things that made it clear he'd known about his family's plans all along. He wasn't innocent. He wasn't being manipulated. He was in on it. I watched that video 3 times, alone in my apartment. Each viewing, I felt something inside me solidify. Not anger, I'd moved past anger weeks ago. This was something colder, clearer, resolve. The morning of my wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m. in my apartment. Not the modest 1-bedroom Marcus knew about my real apartment, the penthouse I owned in a luxury building downtown. My family had flown in the day before. My parents, my 2 brothers, my grandmother. They'd stayed at a hotel, maintaining the fiction until the last moment. Only they knew what I was planning. My father had tried to talk me out of it. Just call it off, he'd said. Why put yourself through this? Because people need to see it, I'd explained. The Ashfords have been doing this for years. Richard's Ponzi scheme has 30 victims that we know of. Patricia's charity fraud probably has dozens more. If I just walk away, they'll find another target. Someone else's daughter. Someone else's family. This has to end publicly, decisively. My mother had held my hand. Are you sure you're not doing this out of hurt? Because Marcus made his choice, I'd said. He chose to lie. He chose to participate in his family's schemes. He doesn't get protection because he has a handsome face and a charming smile. Now, sitting in my real apartment on my wedding morning, I put on my real dress. Not the modest gown Marcus had seen in photos that one was already at the venue. This was different. Vera Wang. Custom-made, elegant, and powerful. The dress of a woman who owned everything she touched. I did my makeup carefully. Hair pulled back in a sleek style. Jewelry that Patricia would recognize. My grandmother's diamond necklace. The one that had been featured in Forbes when my grandfather's company went public. Earrings worth more than the Ashfords' entire estate. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't a factory worker or a naive girl in love. She was Elena Castellano, CEO of Castellano Industries, and she was done playing games. My phone buzzed. A text from David. Everything's in place. Federal agents will be there. Are you ready? I typed back. I was born ready. The wedding venue was beautiful. The Ashfords had insisted on the country club where Patricia was a member, a sprawling estate with gardens and a ballroom that could hold 300 guests. Marcus thought my family was paying for half. In reality, I was paying for everything through a dummy LLC. The Ashfords couldn't afford even their half. Richard's assets were frozen, and they were living on credit cards that were nearly maxed out. I arrived separately from Marcus, as tradition dictated. My bridesmaids' college friends who knew the truth helped me into the modest wedding dress Marcus expected to see. Simple, pretty, inexpensive looking. One of my friends, Sarah, shook her head. I can't believe you're going through with this charade. It'll be worth it, I said, checking my phone. Trust me. At 4 p.m., the ceremony began. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. He was playing his role perfectly dressed nicely but not ostentatiously, looking like a successful mid-level executive rather than a billionaire CEO. Marcus stood at the altar, looking genuinely nervous. For a moment, just one moment, I felt bad about what was coming. Then I saw Patricia in the front row, her smile triumphant. I saw Vivienne whispering to her husband, probably already counting the money they thought they'd have access to. I saw Chase smirking at one of the groomsmen, and I saw Alexandra Hartley sitting in the back row, her face carefully neutral but her eyes locked on Marcus. She'd been invited by the Ashfords to watch Marcus marry me. The audacity was almost admirable. The ceremony proceeded normally. The officiant spoke about love and commitment. Marcus and I exchanged vows, lies wrapped in pretty words. We exchanged rings. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. Before anyone could object, I spoke. Actually, I do. The chapel went absolutely silent. Marcus stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and the first hints of fear. Elena? What are you? I object to this marriage, I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. Because it's built on lies. The officiant looked baffled. Miss Castellano, this isn't. I know this is irregular, I said. But I think everyone here needs to hear what I have to say before we go any further. I turned to face the congregation. 300 faces, staring at me in various stages of shock and confusion. My name is Elena Castellano, I began. Some of you know that name. Most of you think you know who I am. You think I'm a factory worker who got lucky enough to catch Marcus Ashford's eye. You think I'm an ordinary girl marrying up into a prestigious family. I paused, letting the tension build. The truth is quite different. On cue, the large screens positioned around the chapel ostensibly for displaying wedding photos flickered to life. My company's logo appeared. Castellano Industries. I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Castellano Industries, I said. A manufacturing and defense contracting company founded by my grandfather 60 years ago. We employ 40,000 people across 8 countries. Last year, our revenue was $12 billion. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw Patricia's face go white. Richard looked like he might vomit. Marcus's mouth was literally hanging open. For the past 14 months, I continued, I've been conducting an experiment. I wanted to see how Marcus and his family would treat someone they thought had nothing to offer them. Someone they thought was beneath them. The screens changed, showing photographs. Me at that first dinner, wearing my modest dress, Patricia's face, captured mid-whisper, as she called me, the help. Vivian's expression of barely concealed contempt. They failed, I said simply. They failed so spectacularly that I almost couldn't believe it. The insults, the condescension, the not-so-subtle suggestions that I was a burden Marcus was taking on out of kindness. More images appeared. Text messages I'd obtained legally through discovery in Richard's federal case. Messages between Patricia and Vivian discussing how to manage me, how to ensure I gave them access to my family's company before they found a way to upgrade Marcus to Alexandra. But it gets worse, I said. The screens changed again. This time, financial documents appeared. Richard Ashford runs what he calls an investment firm, I said. In reality, he's been operating a Ponzi scheme for the past 8 years. He takes money from new investors and uses it to pay returns to old investors. Classic fraud. The documents scrolled. Bank records, wire transfers, client statements showing impossible returns. He's stolen approximately $8 million from at least 30 victims. Many of them are elderly widows he met through Patricia's charity work. I saw several guests reach for their phones. Some were likely those victims or knew them. Patricia knew, I continued. She was recruiting for him, bringing him new marks through her social connections. Vivian knew. She helped create fake documents to make the investments look legitimate. More images, emails, text messages, recorded phone calls. The federal authorities have known about this for 6 months. They've been building their case. And today, they have everything they need to make arrests. I turned to face Marcus. He looked destroyed, his face ashen, his hands shaking. And you, Marcus, did you know? His voice cracked. Elena, I swear, I didn't know about the fraud. But you knew about other things. Didn't you? The screens changed again. This time, photographs of Marcus and Alexandra. Holding hands. Kissing. Looking at each other the way he'd claimed to look at me. You've been seeing Alexandra Hartley throughout our entire relationship, I said. Your family has been planning to use my supposed connections to save their failing empire. Then transition you to Alexandra once you'd secured what you needed from me. I pulled a small recording device from my bouquet. This is from your bachelor party last week. Would you like me to play it for everyone? Marcus looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Please, he whispered. Please don't. Why not? You said some very interesting things. About how you were doing what your parents needed. About how I was nice enough, but not really your type. About how you just needed to hold it together for a few more months. A woman in the audience gasped. I looked and saw it was Marcus's grandmother. A tiny woman in her 80s who I'd only met once. Her face was filled with disgust as she looked at her grandson. I've spent 14 months being insulted, condescended to, and plotted against, I said. My voice still calm and measured. I could have ended this at any time. I could have revealed who I really was, and watched you all scramble to save face. But I wanted you to show me exactly who you were. And you did. I turned back to the congregation. The federal authorities are outside right now. They're waiting to arrest Richard, Patricia, and Vivian on fraud charges. The evidence has been turned over. The warrants have been issued. This family has been preying on innocent people for years. Today it ends. As if on cue, the chapel doors opened. FBI agents in suits walked in. Badges visible. The chaos that followed was immediate and absolute. Patricia screamed. It wasn't a refined sound, it was raw panic. She tried to run toward the side exit, but 2 FBI agents intercepted her smoothly. Patricia Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Richard didn't run. He just collapsed in his seat, his face in his hands. The agents approached him more gently, but the result was the same. Hands behind back. Miranda rights read. Led away in handcuffs. Vivian fought. She actually tried to shove past an agent, screaming about lawyers and mistakes and how dare they. It took 3 agents to subdue her. Her husband James just watched, making no move to help her. Later, I'd learned he'd been cooperating with investigators for months, giving them evidence in exchange for immunity. The guests were in pandemonium. Some were crying, likely the fraud victims, realizing their suspicions had been confirmed. Some were recording on their phones, already uploading to social media. Some were simply staring in shock. Chase stood frozen near the altar, watching his parents and sister being arrested. He looked at me with something between hatred and fear. You destroyed my family, he said. Your family destroyed themselves, I replied. I just made sure everyone could see it. And Marcus just stood there, still in his tuxedo, looking like a man whose entire world had been torn apart, which, to be fair, it had. He turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Did you ever love me? Even a little?" I considered the question. Honest answer, I thought I might. At the beginning. Before I knew what you were. There were moments when you seemed genuine, when I thought maybe you were just caught up in your family's toxicity. But then I saw who you really were. The lies. The manipulation. The affair. You made your choices, Marcus. Just like I made mine. "What now?" he whispered. "Now? You go home and figure out your life without your parents' schemes propping you up. You deal with the embarrassment, the scandal, the questions. You live with the consequences of your choices." I pulled off the engagement ring, that cloudy, cheap diamond, and placed it in his hand. "Consider this my wedding gift to you. The truth." I walked past him, down the aisle, through the chaos. My family fell in behind me, my parents, my brothers, my grandmother, the people who'd actually loved me, supported me, let me be myself. At the chapel door, I paused and turned back. The FBI was still processing arrests. Guests were filing out, talking frantically. Marcus stood alone at the altar, the picture of devastation. For a moment, just one moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered Patricia calling me the help, Vivian saying I'd always be out of place, Chase suggesting I should be grateful for Marcus's attention, Marcus himself telling his friends I was nice enough, but not really his type. The moment passed. I walked out into the sunshine, climbed into a car that cost more than the Ashfords' house, and went home to my real life. The story exploded across social media within hours. Someone had recorded the entire wedding confrontation. Within 24 hours, it had millions of views. The headlines were spectacular. Billionaire CEO exposes groom's family as fraudsters at her own wedding. Woman plays poor to test fiancé's family. They failed spectacularly. Wedding ceremony becomes FBI sting operation. My phone rang constantly. Media requests, interview offers, even movie deals. I ignored most of them. A few I accepted, but only to tell my side of the story completely. The best interview was with a financial news network. The anchor asked if I'd been cruel to let things go so far. "The Ashfords have been running schemes for years," I said. "They've hurt dozens of people, stolen millions of dollars, destroyed families. If I'd just walked away quietly, they would have found another victim, someone who didn't have my resources, who couldn't defend themselves. By making it public, I ensured they'd face real consequences." "But what about Marcus? He claims he didn't know about the fraud." "Marcus participated in deceiving me," I said. "He maintained a relationship with another woman while we were engaged. He and his family plotted to use me for my connections. Even if he didn't know about the Ponzi scheme specifically, he wasn't innocent." "Do you have any regrets?" I thought about that carefully. I regret wasting 14 months on someone who wasn't worth it. I regret that 30 families lost money to the Ashford scheme. But I don't regret exposing them. Sometimes the only way to stop a pattern of abuse is to drag it into the light. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Richard pled guilty to 17 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Patricia fought the charges at first, but eventually pled guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence: 8 years for conspiracy and wire fraud. Vivian got 5 years plus restitution for her role in creating false documents. Chase wasn't charged. He genuinely hadn't known about the fraud, but his reputation was destroyed by association. He'd left the wedding venue that day and hadn't been seen in public since. And Marcus faced no criminal charges, but the social consequences were severe. His employer, a mid-tier marketing firm, let him go to avoid the scandal. His friends abandoned him. Even his grandmother publicly disowned him in a letter to the editor that went viral. Alexandra Hartley gave exactly one statement to the press: "I ended my relationship with Marcus Ashford the moment I learned he'd been lying to Elena Castellano. I have no respect for dishonesty." Even his backup plan abandoned him. The hardest part of everything that followed was meeting the fraud victims. I arranged a meeting with as many as I could find, 23 people in total, mostly widows in their 60s and 70s. Women like Mrs. Eleanor Robertson, who'd invested her late husband's life insurance payout and lost everything. Mr. David Kim, who'd trusted Richard with his retirement savings and was now working at 72 to make ends meet. We met in a conference room at my company's headquarters. I'd invited my father, my CFO, and our head of legal. I'm sorry, I said to the room. I'm sorry I didn't expose them sooner. I'm sorry you lost your savings. It's not your fault, Mrs. Robertson said gently. You stopped them. That's more than the authorities had managed. Still, I said, I'd like to make things right. I slid folders across the table. Inside each one was a check full restitution for everything they'd lost, plus interest calculated at a fair market rate. I've also set up a victims fund, I continued, for anyone else who comes forward. And my company is creating a financial literacy program to help people recognize and avoid these schemes in the future. Several people were crying. Mr. Kim reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, he said simply. Thank you for seeing us. That moment, that gratitude made everything worth it. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in my office overlooking the city. My real office, with my name on the door and my grandfather's portrait on the wall. There was a knock. My assistant poked her head in. You have a visitor. He says it's personal. Who? She hesitated. Marcus Ashford. I considered turning him away. I'd said everything I needed to say. But curiosity got the better of me. Send him in. Marcus looked different. Thinner, older somehow. His expensive suit had been replaced with off-the-rack khakis and a button-down. His hair was slightly too long, like he'd been skipping haircuts. But his eyes, those were different too. Less confident. More honest. I know I have no right to be here, he began. You don't, I agreed. I wanted to apologize. Properly. Not because I think it'll change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I gestured to a chair. He sat. I was raised to believe that wealth and status mattered more than character, he said. My parents taught me that people were either useful or irrelevant, that love was a luxury we couldn't afford, that everything was a transaction. I knew it was wrong, but it was easier to go along with it than to fight. That's not an excuse, I said. No, it's not. It's an explanation, not an excuse. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was hurting you. I did it anyway because I was a coward. He looked at me directly. You asked me that day if I ever loved you. The honest answer is, I don't think I'm capable of it. Not the way I was raised. But I did care about you, more than I'd cared about anyone. And I hated myself for what I was doing to you. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've spent 6 months in therapy trying to understand why I am the way I am. And I've realized that I need to take responsibility, not just for the affair or the lies, but for being complicit in my family's cruelty. I can't fix what I did, but I can at least acknowledge it. I studied him for a long moment. He seemed genuine. He also seemed broken in a way that might actually lead to growth. What are you doing now? I asked. Working at a nonprofit. It doesn't pay much, but it feels more honest than anything I've done before. I'm also volunteering with a fraud prevention organization, talking to potential victims, helping them recognize red flags. That surprised me. That must be hard. It is. But it's what I should be doing. Using my experience to help people avoid what my family did to others. We sat in silence for a moment. I don't forgive you, I said finally. I'm not sure I ever will. But I respect that you're trying to do better. That's more than I deserve, he said. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you exposed us. My family needed to be stopped. I needed to be stopped. You did what was right, even though it must have been hard. After he left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about justice and redemption and whether they could coexist. I didn't have an answer, but I knew this. I'd trusted my instincts, protected myself, and stopped people who'd been hurting others for years. That was enough. A year after the wedding that never was, I stood in my family's vineyard in Napa Valley, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. My grandmother stood beside me, her hand in mine. At 91, she was still sharp as a tack and twice as fierce. You did good, Mija, she said in her accented English. Your grandfather would be proud. I humiliated a man at the altar. Abuela. Destroyed his family. That's not exactly noble. She snorted an inelegant sound from such an elegant woman. You exposed fraudsters. You saved innocent people from losing their money. You showed that woman and her family that they can't abuse people without consequences. That is very noble. It was also personal, I admitted. I wanted them to feel what they'd made me feel. Invisible. Worthless. Dismissed. So, justice can be personal and still be just. They earned what they got. You simply made sure they received it. I leaned my head on her shoulder. When did you know I was planning something? The moment you told me you were dating a man but hiding who you were. I knew my granddaughter. She does not hide unless she has a reason. You didn't try to stop me. Why would I? Your instincts are good. Your heart is good. I trusted you to do the right thing. She paused. Did you? I thought about Patricia in prison. About the victims who'd been made whole. About Marcus trying to rebuild his life with humility, instead of entitlement. Yes, I said. I think I did. Behind us, my family was gathering for dinner. My parents, my brothers, their families. Real love, uncomplicated by schemes or social climbing. Just people who'd chosen to care about each other. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, my friend who'd been my bridesmaid for the wedding that never happened. HBO bought the rights to your story. They're calling it The Wedding Trap. We're going to be famous. I laughed and showed my grandmother. Television show about your life. She said. Your grandfather would have hated that. Too much attention. What about you? She grinned a wicked expression that reminded me exactly where I'd inherited my capacity for strategic thinking. I think it is perfect. Let the world know. You cannot cheat a Castellano and walk away clean. As we walked back toward the house, toward warmth and family and honest love, I thought about the girl I'd been 14 months ago. The one who'd walked into that coffee shop and met Marcus Ashford. The one who'd made a split-second decision to hide her true self and see what happened. She'd been curious, maybe a little naive, definitely optimistic. The woman I was now. She was wiser, more cautious, less trusting. But she was also stronger, more certain, more herself. The Ashfords had tried to make me feel small. Instead, they'd shown me exactly how powerful I really was. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift they could have given me, even if they'd never meant to give it at all.